Question 1. The efficiency study reveals a need to update driver training materials in Ontario to better reflect current road conditions and driver challenges. Which of the following approaches best ensures that any curriculum adjustments comply with Ontario's licensing standards and promote public safety? Option A. Adopt training methodologies that are perceived as innovative, even if their efficacy in preparing drivers for Ontario's specific road conditions and licensing tests has not been empirically validated. Option B. Implement curriculum changes based on instructor feedback and popular training trends without a formal evaluation of their effectiveness in meeting Ontario's licensing requirements. Option C. Reduce the duration of driver training modules to increase program accessibility, assuming that core safety principles are implicitly understood. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment of proposed curriculum changes on driver competency and road safety, ensuring alignment with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and MTO licensing standards. Correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment of proposed curriculum changes on driver competency and road safety, ensuring alignment with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and MTO licensing standards. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential need to adjust driver training curriculum in Ontario to better prepare new drivers for complex urban driving scenarios. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for comprehensive driver education with the practical constraints of training time and resources, while strictly adhering to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and its associated regulations. The Ministry of Transportation Ontario, MTO, mandates specific learning outcomes and skill demonstrations for licensing, and any curriculum changes must align with these requirements and promote public safety. The best approach involves a thorough impact assessment of proposed curriculum changes on driver competency and road safety, ensuring alignment with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. This approach is correct because it prioritizes a data-driven evaluation of how modifications might affect a driver's ability to safely operate a vehicle in various Ontario conditions, as mandated by the MTO's licensing standards. It involves analyzing whether the proposed changes enhance the acquisition of skills necessary to navigate complex intersections, adverse weather, and interactions with other road users, all critical elements for safe driving in Ontario. This aligns with the MTO's overarching goal of reducing collisions and improving road safety through effective driver education. An incorrect approach would be to implement curriculum changes based solely on anecdotal feedback from instructors without a systematic evaluation of their impact on driver performance and safety. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for evidence-based curriculum development and could inadvertently lead to drivers being less prepared for real-world driving challenges in Ontario, potentially increasing the risk of collisions. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize the reduction of training hours to make the program more accessible, without a corresponding assessment of whether essential safety-critical skills are adequately covered. This directly contravenes the spirit and letter of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, which aims to ensure a minimum standard of competence for all licensed drivers to protect public safety. A further incorrect approach would be to adopt training methods that are popular or novel, but have not been vetted for their effectiveness in teaching the specific skills required by the Ontario licensing examination and for safe driving on Ontario roads. This neglects the regulatory imperative to ensure that training leads to demonstrable competency as defined by the MTO. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific safety or competency gaps the curriculum change aims to address. This should be followed by a rigorous assessment of proposed solutions against the requirements of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and MTO guidelines. Pilot testing and data collection on driver performance and safety outcomes are crucial before widespread implementation. Continuous evaluation and adaptation based on real-world data and evolving road safety challenges are also essential components of responsible curriculum management. Question 2. The performance metrics show a significant increase in collisions involving drivers in the G2 stage of Ontario's graduated licensing system, considering the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and Ministry of Transportation guidelines. Which of the following strategies would be the most appropriate and effective response to address this trend? Option A. Implement a policy of automatic license suspension for any novice driver involved in a collision, regardless of fault or severity. Option B. Immediately increase the difficulty of the G2 exit road test for all drivers across Ontario to ensure only the most competent drivers progress to the G license. Option C. Rely on public feedback and media reports about perceived unsafe driving by G2 drivers to inform changes to the licensing system. Option D. Conduct a detailed analysis of the accident data to identify common contributing factors, specific high-risk driving behaviors, and geographical hotspots. Then develop targeted educational programs and potentially adjust G2 exit test criteria based on these findings. Correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed analysis of the accident data to identify common contributing factors, specific high-risk driving behaviors, and geographical hotspots. Then develop targeted educational programs and potentially adjust G2 exit test criteria based on these findings. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in novice driver accident rates within Ontario. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need to improve road safety with the rights and learning process of new drivers, all while adhering to the strict regulatory framework governing driver licensing and road safety in Ontario. Careful judgment is required to implement effective interventions that are both compliant and impactful. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the identified performance metrics, cross-referencing them with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and Ministry of Transportation guidelines for driver education and licensing. This includes analyzing the types of errors contributing to accidents, the geographical locations where they occur, and the specific demographics of novice drivers involved. Based on this analysis, targeted interventions can be developed, such as enhanced G1/G2 exit test criteria, mandatory advanced driving modules for specific risk factors identified, or increased graduated licensing restrictions for a defined period. This approach is correct because it is data-driven, directly addresses the observed issues, and aligns with the Ministry of Transportation's mandate to promote safe driving practices and reduce collisions, as outlined in the Highway Traffic Act's objectives for licensing and road safety. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement a blanket increase in the difficulty of all road tests without a detailed analysis of the root causes of the accident trend. This fails to address specific contributing factors and could unfairly penalize all novice drivers, potentially leading to frustration and a perception of unfairness, which is not conducive to fostering safe driving habits. Furthermore, it may not align with the progressive nature of the graduated licensing system as intended by the Ministry of Transportation. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on punitive measures, such as immediate license suspension for any minor infraction by a novice driver. While safety is paramount, the graduated licensing system is designed to allow new drivers to gain experience under controlled conditions. Overly punitive measures without considering the learning curve and the specific context of the infraction would contradict the rehabilitative and educational intent of the licensing system and the Highway Traffic Act. A further incorrect approach would be to rely on anecdotal evidence or public opinion without substantiating it with the performance metrics. While public feedback is valuable, regulatory decisions must be grounded in objective data and analysis to ensure fairness and effectiveness, as mandated by the principles of good governance and regulatory oversight in Ontario. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, clearly define the problem using objective data. Second, consult the relevant provincial legislation and guidelines, in this case, the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and Ministry of Transportation policies. Third, brainstorm and evaluate potential solutions based on their feasibility, effectiveness, and regulatory compliance. Fourth, implement the chosen solution with clear communication and a plan for ongoing monitoring and evaluation. And finally, be prepared to adapt the approach based on new data and feedback. Question 3. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for more efficient processing of vehicle registration applications at a dealership in Ontario. An applicant is eager to complete their purchase, but is missing a specific piece of documentation related to their driving record that is typically verified through the Ministry of Transportation Ontario, MTO. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant approach for the dealership to obtain the necessary driver information? Option A. Misrepresent the urgency of the situation to an MTO employee to gain access to the driver's record. Option B. Formally request the required driver information from the Ministry of Transportation, Ontario through their designated official channels. Option C. Proceed with the registration process without the complete driver information, assuming the applicant will provide it later. Option D. Utilize a personal contact at the MTO to expedite the retrieval of the driver information. The correct answer is B. Formally request the required driver information from the Ministry of Transportation, Ontario through their designated official channels. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect personal information. The Ministry of Transportation, Ontario, MTO, has specific regulations regarding the handling of driver information, and any breach can have serious consequences, including fines and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance while still addressing the operational need. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves formally requesting the necessary information through the established channels provided by the MTO. This approach ensures that the request is documented, authorized, and handled in accordance with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and its associated regulations concerning privacy and data access. By following the official process, the dealership demonstrates a commitment to legal compliance and responsible data handling, safeguarding both the applicant's privacy and the dealership's integrity. This method respects the legal framework governing personal information in Ontario. Incorrect approach is analysis. Accessing the information through an unauthorized or informal channel, such as a personal contact within the MTO, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This bypasses the established security protocols and privacy safeguards designed to protect driver information, potentially violating the Ontario Highway Traffic Act's provisions on data privacy and unauthorized access. It also creates a risk of data misuse and erodes trust. Attempting to obtain the information by misrepresenting the purpose of the request or by pressuring an MTO employee is also a serious ethical breach and a violation of regulatory guidelines. Such actions undermine the integrity of the system and could lead to disciplinary action against both the dealership employee and the MTO employee, as well as potential legal repercussions under Ontario law. Delaying the application process indefinitely without a valid reason or attempting to proceed without the necessary verification, even if the applicant is eager, is also professionally unsound. While not a direct breach of data privacy, it demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to adhere to the proper procedures for processing vehicle registrations and driver-related documentation as mandated by Ontario regulations. This can lead to operational inefficiencies and customer dissatisfaction. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the specific information required and the relevant regulatory body, MTO in Ontario. 2. Consulting the applicable legislation and guidelines, e.g., Ontario Highway Traffic Act, to understand the authorized methods for obtaining such information. 3. Utilizing the official, documented channels for information requests. 4. If unsure about the process, seeking clarification from the MTO or legal counsel. 5. Maintaining clear communication with the applicant regarding the process and any potential delays due to regulatory requirements. Question 4. The performance metrics show a significant increase in near-miss incidents reported by drivers in Ontario who have recently obtained their G2 licenses. Considering the Ontario graduated licensing system's emphasis on skill development and safety, what is the most appropriate initial response to this trend? Option A. Classify the near-miss data as normal learning curve occurrences and monitor for a significant increase in actual collisions before taking further action. Option B. Propose a new restriction for all G2 drivers, prohibiting them from driving on highways during peak traffic hours. Option C. Develop and implement targeted educational resources and workshops for G2 drivers focusing on the specific behaviors identified in the near-miss reports. Option D. Recommend an immediate increase in demerit point penalties for all drivers under the age of 25 in Ontario. The correct answer is C. Develop and implement targeted educational resources and workshops for G2 drivers focusing on the specific behaviors identified in the near-miss reports. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in near-miss incidents reported by new drivers in Ontario. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need to improve road safety with the responsibility of not unduly penalizing novice drivers who are still developing their skills. Careful judgment is required to identify effective interventions that are both compliant with Ontario's Graduated Licensing System, GLS, and promote safe driving habits without creating undue barriers. The best approach involves a proactive, educational intervention focused on reinforcing safe driving practices and addressing common errors identified in the near-miss data. This aligns with the overarching goals of the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's GLS, which aims to equip new drivers with the experience and skills necessary to drive safely. Specifically, this approach would involve developing targeted educational modules or workshops that address the specific behaviors contributing to near misses, such as improper lane changes, following too closely, or failing to yield. This is ethically sound as it prioritizes driver education and skill development, which is a core tenet of public safety initiatives. It is also regulatorily compliant as it supports the ministry's mandate to reduce collisions and improve driver competency through continuous learning. An incorrect approach would be to immediately recommend stricter enforcement measures, such as increased demerit point penalties for all drivers under a certain age. Without further analysis, this fails to acknowledge that near misses, while concerning, are not necessarily indicative of deliberate rule-breaking and may stem from inexperience. Such a punitive measure could disproportionately affect new drivers and create a climate of fear rather than learning, potentially discouraging reporting of future incidents. It also bypasses the educational focus of the GLS. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the near-miss data as statistically insignificant or a normal part of the learning curve for new drivers. This is professionally irresponsible and ethically questionable, as it ignores a potential indicator of systemic issues or emerging risks on Ontario's roads. It fails to uphold the duty of care to protect the public and could lead to preventable collisions. This approach neglects the proactive safety mandate inherent in road safety regulations. A further incorrect approach would be to implement a blanket ban on certain driving activities for all new drivers, such as driving during specific hours or on certain types of roads, without a clear causal link between these activities and the observed near misses. While some restrictions exist under the GLS, introducing new, broad restrictions without evidence-based justification could be overly burdensome and not effectively address the root causes of the near misses. This approach lacks the targeted, data-driven rationale required for effective policy and intervention. Professionals should employ a data-driven, risk assessment framework. This involves thoroughly analyzing the near-miss data to identify specific contributing factors, consulting with driving instructors and safety experts, and considering evidence-based interventions that align with the educational and progressive nature of the Ontario GLS. The focus should always be on enhancing driver competency and safety through appropriate means, rather than solely on punitive measures or inaction. Question 5. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a vehicle's unsecured load posing a hazard on Ontario highways. You observe such a vehicle. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Attempt to contact the registered owner of the vehicle to inform them of the issue and request their cooperation in securing the load. Option B. Ignore the situation as it is not an immediate, critical danger and you are not authorized to intervene directly. Option C. Take photos of the vehicle and its load to document the potential hazard for a later report to the Ministry of Transportation. Option D. Immediately attempt to pull the vehicle over and instruct the driver to secure the load, or, if unsuccessful, to stop the vehicle. The correct answer is A. Attempt to contact the registered owner of the vehicle to inform them of the issue and request their cooperation in securing the load. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need to address a potential safety hazard with the legal and ethical obligations to follow proper procedures and respect the rights of the vehicle owner. A hasty or unauthorized action could lead to legal repercussions, damage to the vehicle, or a breach of privacy. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any action taken is both effective in mitigating risk and compliant with Ontario's Highway Traffic Act and related privacy legislation. The best approach involves contacting the registered owner of the vehicle to inform them of the observed issue and request their cooperation in addressing it. This respects the owner's property rights and allows for a collaborative solution. If the owner is unreachable or uncooperative, the next step would be to consult with a supervisor or the appropriate authorities, e.g., the Ministry of Transportation Enforcement, to determine the correct course of action according to Ontario's regulations. This ensures that any intervention is authorized and conducted in a manner that aligns with provincial law, such as the Highway Traffic Act, which governs vehicle safety and operation. This method prioritizes due process and avoids unauthorized interference with private property. An incorrect approach would be to immediately attempt to disable or remove the vehicle without attempting to contact the owner or seeking authorization. This action could be construed as an unlawful interference with private property and a violation of the owner's rights. Furthermore, it bypasses established procedures for addressing vehicle safety concerns, potentially leading to legal liability for the individual or organization taking such action. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the potential safety hazard altogether due to a reluctance to engage with the owner or authorities. This failure to act when a safety risk is apparent is professionally negligent and could have severe consequences, potentially violating the duty of care owed to other road users and contravening the spirit of the Highway Traffic Act, which aims to ensure road safety. The professional reasoning process in such situations should involve a risk assessment, followed by an attempt to resolve the issue through communication and authorized channels. If direct resolution is not possible, escalating the matter to a supervisor or relevant regulatory body for guidance is crucial. This structured approach ensures that decisions are made with full awareness of legal obligations, ethical considerations, and the potential impact on all parties involved, adhering strictly to the regulatory framework of Ontario. Question 6. Market research demonstrates that a private investigator in Ontario requires the contact information of a specific driver to serve legal documents related to a civil matter. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant method for the investigator to obtain this information? Option A. Utilize informal networks and third-party contacts to gather the driver's personal details, assuming the information will be accurate and readily available. Option B. Submit a formal request for the driver's contact information through the official channels established by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, adhering to the procedures outlined in the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act and the Highway Traffic Act. Option C. Approach the Ontario Ministry of Transportation directly with an informal verbal request for the driver's contact details, bypassing the standard application process. Option D. Directly contact the registered owner of the vehicle, as listed on the vehicle's registration, without any prior formal request or legal authorization from the ministry. The correct answer is B. Submit a formal request for the driver's contact information through the official channels established by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, adhering to the procedures outlined in the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act and the Highway Traffic Act. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect personal privacy and ensure data accuracy. A hasty approach could lead to significant legal repercussions and damage to public trust. The best approach involves a systematic and legally compliant method for gathering information. This means initiating a formal request through the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's established channels for accessing driver information. This process ensures that the request is legitimate, documented, and adheres to the privacy provisions outlined in Ontario's Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act (FIPA) and the Highway Traffic Act. By following the prescribed procedure, the investigator demonstrates respect for legal frameworks governing access to personal data and avoids unauthorized disclosure or misuse of sensitive information. This method prioritizes lawful data acquisition, thereby safeguarding against potential legal challenges and maintaining professional integrity. An approach that involves directly contacting the registered owner without a formal request or legal basis is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses established privacy protocols and could be construed as an unauthorized attempt to obtain personal information, violating FIPA. Such an action could lead to disciplinary measures and legal penalties for the investigator and their organization. Another unacceptable approach is to rely on informal channels or third-party sources to obtain the driver's information. This method lacks verification and can lead to the use of inaccurate or outdated data. Furthermore, It circumvents the legal requirements for data access and could expose the investigator to liability for obtaining information through improper means, potentially breaching privacy laws. Finally, attempting to access the information through a direct inquiry to the ministry without following the proper procedure, even if well-intentioned, is also professionally unsound. While it might seem more direct than informal channels, it still fails to adhere to the specific legal requirements for accessing driver records in Ontario, which are designed to protect individual privacy and prevent misuse of information. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the relevant legislation, e.g., FIPA, Highway Traffic Act, identifying the appropriate channels for information requests, and documenting all actions taken. When faced with a need for information, the first step should always be to determine the legal basis for obtaining it and to follow the prescribed procedures, rather than seeking shortcuts that could compromise privacy or legality. Question 7. The performance metrics show a significant increase in collisions at the intersection of Yonge Street and Eglinton Avenue in Toronto, Ontario. As a driver approaching this intersection, what is the most responsible course of action to take to mitigate the risk of contributing to or being involved in a collision? Option A. Rely on the behavior of other vehicles to determine your own speed and actions. Option B. Maintain normal speed and proceed through the intersection, assuming other drivers will adhere to traffic laws. Option C. Reduce speed significantly, increase scanning for all road users, and be prepared to stop or take evasive action. Option D. Stop completely before the intersection and wait for a clear indication that it is safe to proceed, even if traffic is backing up. The correct answer is C. Reduce speed significantly, increase scanning for all road users, and be prepared to stop or take evasive action. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the number of collisions at a specific intersection in Toronto, Ontario. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to not only understand traffic laws, but also to apply them in a dynamic and potentially hazardous situation, prioritizing safety above all else. The driver must assess the risk and react appropriately to prevent further incidents. The best approach involves a proactive and defensive driving strategy. This means anticipating potential hazards and taking steps to avoid them, even if it means slightly altering one's normal driving pattern. Specifically, when approaching an intersection with a history of collisions, a driver should reduce speed, increase their awareness of other road users, vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists, and be prepared to stop or take evasive action. This aligns with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act's general duty to drive in a safe and responsible manner, which implicitly includes exercising caution in known high-risk areas. The emphasis is on preventing a collision before it can occur, demonstrating a commitment to public safety and adherence to the spirit of traffic regulations. An incorrect approach would be to maintain normal speed and assume other drivers will behave predictably. This fails to acknowledge the documented risk at the intersection and demonstrates a lack of defensive driving, potentially violating the duty of care expected of all drivers in Ontario. Another incorrect approach is to become overly cautious to the point of impeding traffic flow unnecessarily. While safety is paramount, drivers are also expected to contribute to the efficient movement of traffic. Unnecessary braking or stopping without a clear hazard can create new risks for following vehicles and may be considered an unsafe driving practice. Finally, relying solely on the actions of other drivers to dictate one's own behavior is also problematic. A responsible driver must be prepared for the unexpected and not assume others will always act safely or predictably. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk assessment and mitigation. This involves 1. Recognizing potential hazards, e.g., a history of collisions at an intersection. 2. Evaluating the severity of the risk. 3. Selecting the safest course of action that balances safety with the need for efficient traffic flow, always erring on the side of caution. 4. Continuously monitoring the environment for changing conditions. Question 8. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the failure rate for the G2 road test in Ontario, considering the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and the Ministry of Transportation's mandate for road safety. Which of the following actions would be the most appropriate and compliant response to address this trend? Option A. Implement a policy to lower the passing score for the G2 road test to accommodate the observed failure rate. Option B. Immediately increase the complexity and difficulty of the G2 road test maneuvers to better challenge new drivers. Option C. Propose amendments to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act to reduce the minimum number of supervised driving hours required before a G2 license can be obtained. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the G2 road test content and examiner training procedures to ensure they accurately reflect current safe driving practices and are applied consistently. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the G2 road test content and examiner training procedures to ensure they accurately reflect current safe driving practices and are applied consistently. Explanation: the performance metrics show a concerning trend in the number of novice drivers failing their G2 road tests in Ontario. The scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an understanding of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and its associated regulations concerning driver licensing and testing, while also considering the ethical imperative to ensure public safety on the roads. The Ministry of Transportation, MTO, is responsible for setting and enforcing these standards. A careful judgment is required to identify the most effective and compliant approach to address this trend. The best approach involves a thorough review of the G2 road test criteria and examiner training protocols. This is correct because it directly addresses the stated problem by examining the core components of the testing process itself. The Ontario Highway Traffic Act, specifically sections related to driver examination and licensing, mandates that road tests accurately assess a driver's ability to operate a vehicle safely and in accordance with traffic laws, ensuring that the test content remains relevant and that examiners are consistently trained to apply the criteria objectively is crucial for upholding these standards and ensuring that only competent drivers are granted a G2 license. This aligns with the MTO's mandate to promote road safety. An approach that focuses solely on increasing the difficulty of the G2 road test without a corresponding review of the curriculum or examiner training would be incorrect. This fails to address potential systemic issues within the testing process and could unfairly penalize drivers who have been trained to meet existing standards. It also risks creating a test that is not a true reflection of safe driving practices as defined by the Highway Traffic Act. Another incorrect approach would be to suggest reducing the number of required practice hours for new drivers. This directly contradicts the spirit and intent of graduated licensing, which is designed to provide new drivers with supervised experience before granting them full privileges. The Highway Traffic Act emphasizes a progressive approach to licensing to build driver competency and reduce risk. Finally, an approach that proposes to relax the passing standards for the G2 road test would be ethically and regulatorily unsound. This would compromise public safety by allowing less competent drivers onto the road, directly violating the MTO's responsibility to ensure that all licensed drivers meet a minimum standard of proficiency as outlined in the Highway Traffic Act. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes data-driven analysis, regulatory compliance, and public safety. This involves 1. Clearly defining the problem based on performance metrics, 2. Identifying relevant legislation and regulations, e.g., Ontario Highway Traffic Act, 3. Evaluating potential solutions against these legal and ethical requirements, 4. Consulting with relevant stakeholders, e.g., driving instructors, MTO officials, 5. Implementing the most effective and compliant solution with ongoing monitoring and evaluation. Question 9. The performance metrics show a slight increase in reported collisions at a particular intersection in Toronto, Ontario, over the past quarter. Considering the mandate of the Ministry of Transportation, Ontario, to ensure road safety, which of the following actions represents the most responsible and effective initial response? Option A. Immediately initiate plans for significant physical modifications to the intersection, such as installing new traffic signals or widening lanes, to address the perceived safety issue. Option B. Conduct a detailed analysis of collision reports, cross-reference with traffic data and site conditions, and perform an on-site engineering assessment to identify root causes before proposing solutions. Option C. Classify the increase in collisions as a minor statistical fluctuation and monitor the situation without immediate intervention, assuming it will resolve on its own. Option D. Rely primarily on public complaints and anecdotal reports regarding the intersection's safety to guide any subsequent actions. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed analysis of collision reports, cross-reference with traffic data and site conditions, and perform an on-site engineering assessment to identify root causes before proposing solutions. Explanation: the performance metrics show a slight increase in reported collisions at a particular intersection in Toronto, Ontario, over the past quarter. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a proactive and responsible approach to public safety, balancing the need for immediate action with thorough investigation. Simply reacting to the data without understanding its context could lead to ineffective or even detrimental interventions. Careful judgment is required to determine the most appropriate course of action based on the available information and the mandate of the Ministry of Transportation Ontario, MTO. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive review of the collision data, including the severity, contributing factors, and time of day for each incident. This data should then be cross-referenced with traffic volume studies, road design schematics, and any recent changes in traffic patterns or infrastructure in the vicinity of the intersection. Following this detailed analysis, a site visit by a qualified traffic engineer will be conducted to observe traffic flow, driver behavior, and the physical conditions of the intersection. Based on this holistic assessment, recommendations for potential safety improvements, such as signal timing adjustments, signage enhancements, or physical modifications, would be developed and presented for approval. This approach aligns with the MTO's commitment to road safety as outlined in the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, which emphasizes the need for evidence-based decision-making to prevent accidents and protect road users. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement costly and potentially disruptive physical changes to the intersection, such as installing new traffic lights or widening lanes, without first conducting a thorough investigation into the root causes of the increased collisions. This bypasses the critical step of data analysis and site assessment, leading to a reactive and potentially wasteful expenditure of public funds, and may not address the actual safety concerns. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the increase in collisions as a statistical anomaly without further investigation, especially if the increase is statistically significant. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the duty of care to the public and could result in continued or worsening safety issues, contravening the MTO's mandate to ensure safe roadways. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or public complaints without corroborating it with objective collision data and engineering assessments. While public input is valuable, professional decision-making must be grounded in verifiable data and expert analysis to ensure effective and appropriate safety interventions. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making framework that prioritizes data-driven analysis, expert assessment, and adherence to regulatory requirements. This involves defining the problem, gathering relevant data, analyzing the findings, developing potential solutions, evaluating those solutions against established criteria, including cost-effectiveness and safety impact, implementing the chosen solution, and monitoring its effectiveness. This iterative process ensures that interventions are targeted, effective, and aligned with the overarching goal of enhancing road safety in Ontario. Question 10. The monitoring system demonstrates a driver completing the Ontario G2 road test. The examiner has recorded the following: 5 minor driving faults, each worth 5 demerit points, and 1 observation fault, worth 10 demerit points. The driver also performed a perfect parallel park and executed all required maneuvers without any critical errors. Based on the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario's, MTO, G2 road test evaluation criteria, what is the driver's total demerit point accumulation and should they pass the test? Option A. The driver has accumulated 25 demerit points and passes the test. Option B. The driver has accumulated 35 demerit points and passes the test. Option C. The driver has accumulated 25 demerit points and fails the test. Option D. The driver has accumulated 35 demerit points and fails the test. Correct answer is D. The driver has accumulated 35 demerit points and fails the test. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for efficient traffic flow with the long-term safety and compliance of drivers. The Ministry of Transportation of Ontario, MTO, mandates specific standards for road testing to ensure all drivers possess the necessary skills and knowledge to operate a vehicle safely. Misinterpreting or misapplying these standards can lead to unqualified drivers being licensed, increasing the risk of accidents, or, conversely, unfairly failing competent drivers. The core of the challenge lies in objective assessment and adherence to established criteria. The best approach involves a precise calculation of the driver's performance against the established scoring rubric for the Ontario G2 road test. This means meticulously tallying all critical errors and demerit points accumulated during the test. The MTO's driver's handbook and the official G2 road test evaluation form provide the definitive criteria for passing. A driver passes if they accumulate fewer than 30 demerit points and commit no critical errors. Therefore, accurately summing the demerit points and identifying any critical errors is the only legally and ethically sound method to determine pass or fail status, directly aligning with the MTO's regulatory framework for driver licensing. An approach that relies on a general feeling of the driver's competence without a precise point tally is professionally unacceptable. This is because it introduces subjectivity and deviates from the objective, quantifiable standards set by the MTO. Such an approach fails to adhere to the regulatory requirement for a standardized evaluation process, potentially leading to inconsistent and unfair outcomes. Another unacceptable approach is to pass the driver solely because they did not cause an immediate accident. While avoiding accidents is a primary goal of safe driving, the MTO's evaluation encompasses a broader range of skills and adherence to traffic laws, not just the absence of immediate collisions. Failing to account for all accumulated demerit points and critical errors, even if no accident occurred, means the driver may not have demonstrated the full spectrum of safe driving practices required by the province. Finally, passing a driver based on the examiner's personal opinion of their potential, rather than their demonstrated performance during the test, is also a failure. The road test is an assessment of current abilities against established benchmarks, not a prediction of future driving prowess. This approach bypasses the regulatory requirement for a skills-based evaluation and undermines the integrity of the licensing process. The professional decision-making process for such situations should always begin with a thorough understanding of the relevant provincial regulations and testing standards. This involves consulting official documentation, such as the MTO Driver's Handbook and test evaluation forms. The assessment must then be conducted objectively, meticulously recording all observed behaviors and errors against these established criteria. Any calculations or scoring must be performed with absolute accuracy. If there is any ambiguity, seeking clarification from a supervisor or referring back to the official guidelines is paramount. The ultimate decision must be justifiable based on the documented evidence and the regulatory framework. Question 11. During the evaluation of a situation involving an urgent request for driver information from an individual claiming to be a family member of a driver involved in a minor incident in Ontario, what is the most appropriate course of action to balance privacy concerns with the need for timely information? Option A. Disclose the requested driver information immediately, citing the caller's stated relationship and the urgency of the situation to ensure prompt resolution. Option B. Ask the caller for the driver's license number to confirm their identity before providing any details about the driver. Option C. Refuse to provide any information whatsoever and terminate the call, as all driver information is strictly confidential. Option D. Verify the caller's identity and the legitimacy of their request through official Ministry of Transportation channels before disclosing any information, offering to connect them to the appropriate department if necessary. The correct answer is D. Verify the caller's identity and the legitimacy of their request through official Ministry of Transportation channels before disclosing any information, offering to connect them to the appropriate department if necessary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect personal data and ensure road safety. The driver's emotional state and the urgency of their request create pressure to act quickly, but a hasty decision could compromise privacy or lead to an unsafe outcome. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves verifying the identity of the caller and the legitimacy of their request through official channels before disclosing any information. This approach upholds the principles of privacy and data protection mandated by Ontario's privacy legislation, such as the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, FIPA, which governs the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information by government institutions. It also aligns with the ethical responsibility to ensure that information is only shared with authorized individuals for legitimate purposes, thereby contributing to overall road safety by preventing unauthorized access to sensitive driver data. Incorrect approaches analysis. Disclosing the information immediately based on the caller's stated relationship and urgency fails to verify the caller's identity or their right to access the information. This bypasses established privacy protocols and could lead to a breach of the driver's personal information, violating FIPA. It also risks enabling someone with malicious intent to gain access to sensitive data, potentially compromising road safety. Asking the caller for the driver's license number to confirm their identity is an insufficient verification method. While it might seem like a reasonable step, it still relies on the caller providing information that could be obtained by unauthorized means. True verification requires cross-referencing with official records through secure, authorized procedures, not simply accepting information provided by the caller. This approach still risks unauthorized disclosure, refusing to provide any information and ending the call without offering alternative, authorized channels for obtaining the necessary details is unhelpful and potentially detrimental to road safety if the caller has a legitimate need for information that could prevent an incident. While privacy is paramount, completely shutting down communication without guiding the caller towards a proper resolution is not best practice. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a structured decision-making process. First, they must identify the core request and the potential implications of fulfilling or denying it. Second, they should consult relevant policies and legislation, in this case, Ontario's privacy laws and Ministry of Transportation guidelines, to understand their obligations. Third, they should prioritize the most secure and ethical method of verification and information disclosure, which typically involves official channels and authorized personnel. If direct disclosure is not permissible, they should guide the inquirer to the appropriate department or procedure for obtaining the information legally and safely. Question 12. What factors determine a driver's immediate obligation when experiencing a sudden and significant onset of dizziness while operating a vehicle on a highway in Ontario? Option A. The driver's reliance on advice from a passenger or a remote contact regarding their fitness to drive. Option B. The driver's desire to reach their intended destination as quickly as possible. Option C. The driver's belief that a short rest will be sufficient to overcome the dizziness without stopping. Option D. The driver's immediate assessment of their ability to safely control the vehicle and the potential risk to themselves and others. The correct answer is D. The driver's immediate assessment of their ability to safely control the vehicle and the potential risk to themselves and others. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to make a critical judgment call under pressure, balancing immediate personal needs with the overarching legal and safety obligations of operating a vehicle in Ontario. The driver must assess the severity of their condition and its potential impact on their ability to drive safely, considering the significant risks to themselves and others. This necessitates an understanding of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario and the ethical responsibility of all road users. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves prioritizing safety and legal compliance by immediately pulling over to a safe location and assessing the situation. If the driver feels unwell to the point where their driving ability is compromised, they must cease driving and seek appropriate assistance. This aligns with Section 46 of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario, which mandates that no person shall drive a vehicle on a highway unless they are in a condition to drive it safely. Furthermore, it upholds the ethical principle of not endangering other road users. Incorrect approaches analysis. Continuing to drive while feeling significantly unwell, even if attempting to reach a destination, is a direct violation of Section 46 of the Highway Traffic Act. It demonstrates a failure to prioritize public safety and an irresponsible disregard for the potential consequences of impaired driving ability. This approach is ethically unacceptable as it knowingly puts others at risk. Pulling over but then deciding to continue driving after a brief rest, without a thorough self-assessment or confirmation of restored driving capability, is also problematic. While pulling over is a good first step, it does not absolve the driver of the responsibility to ensure they are fit to drive. If the underlying condition persists or worsens, continuing to drive remains unsafe and illegal. Contacting a friend or family member for advice while continuing to drive is a dangerous compromise. While seeking support is understandable, the decision to drive must be based on the driver's own assessment of their fitness to operate a vehicle, not on the opinion of someone not present to observe the driver's condition or the road conditions. This approach fails to meet the legal standard of being able to drive safely. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any field, including driving, must adopt a proactive and risk-averse approach when their capacity to perform their duties is in question. The decision-making framework should involve 1. Immediate recognition of a potential impairment or risk. 2. Prioritization of safety and legal obligations above personal convenience. 3. Ceasing the activity if impairment is suspected or confirmed. 4. Seeking appropriate assistance or alternative solutions. 5. Thorough reassessment of capability before resuming the activity. Question 13. The performance metrics show a significant increase in collisions at a particular intersection in Toronto, Ontario over the last 6 months. As you approach this intersection, what is the most responsible and legally compliant driving action to take? Option A. Reduce speed significantly. Scan thoroughly for all potential hazards including pedestrians and cyclists and be prepared to stop. Option B. Focus solely on other vehicles, as they are the primary cause of most intersection collisions. Option C. Maintain your usual speed, trusting that traffic signals will manage the flow and prevent accidents. Option D. Proceed through the intersection at the posted speed limit, assuming it is safe because no immediate danger is apparent during your approach. The correct answer is A. Reduce speed significantly. Scan thoroughly for all potential hazards including pedestrians and cyclists and be prepared to stop. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning increase in collisions at a specific intersection in Toronto, Ontario, over the past 6 months. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to not only understand traffic laws, but also to apply them proactively to prevent accidents, demonstrating a commitment to public safety beyond mere compliance. The driver must assess the situation, identify potential hazards, and implement safe driving practices. The best approach involves a comprehensive assessment of the intersection's conditions and a proactive adjustment of driving behavior to mitigate identified risks. This includes slowing down significantly upon approach, scanning for potential hazards such as pedestrians, cyclists, or other vehicles making unexpected movements, and being prepared to stop. This aligns with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act's general duty to drive in a safe and responsible manner, emphasizing the need to avoid collisions and protect vulnerable road users. Specifically, Section 128 of the Act mandates that drivers must drive in a careful and prudent manner, and at a rate of speed that does not endanger the lives or safety of any person. This proactive slowing and scanning directly addresses the increased collision data by anticipating potential dangers. An incorrect approach would be to maintain the usual speed and rely solely on the traffic signals. This fails to acknowledge the elevated risk indicated by the performance metrics and neglects the driver's responsibility to adapt their driving to prevailing conditions, potentially violating the duty to drive safely. Another incorrect approach would be to only pay attention to other vehicles and ignore pedestrians or cyclists. This is a critical failure, as the Highway Traffic Act protects all road users, and failing to consider vulnerable individuals significantly increases the risk of a collision, directly contravening the spirit and letter of safe driving regulations. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to assume the intersection is safe because no accidents have occurred during the driver's immediate approach. This reactive stance ignores the statistical evidence of increased risk and demonstrates a lack of foresight, which is contrary to the professional obligation to prioritize safety and prevent foreseeable harm. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk assessment and mitigation. This involves 1. Acknowledging and analyzing available data like performance metrics. 2. Understanding the legal and ethical obligations to ensure safety. 3. Proactively adjusting behavior based on identified risks. And 4. Continuously scanning for and responding to potential hazards. Question 14. The control framework reveals that following a minor collision on a quiet residential street in Toronto, Ontario, where no apparent injuries are visible, what is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for a driver? Option A. Admit fault to the other driver to resolve the situation quickly and amicably. Option B. Immediately drive away from the scene to avoid any potential complications or delays. Option C. Ensure the scene is safe. Check for any injuries. Exchange driver's license and insurance information with the other driver, and then, if safe and necessary, move the vehicles out of traffic. Option D. Focus solely on assessing the damage to your own vehicle before interacting with the other driver. The correct answer is C. Ensure the scene is safe. Check for any injuries. Exchange driver's license and insurance information with the other driver, and then, if safe and necessary, move the vehicles out of traffic. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where a driver's immediate actions following a minor collision in Ontario could have significant legal and safety implications. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to assess the situation and ensure safety with the legal obligations under Ontario's Highway Traffic Act. A driver must act responsibly to prevent further harm and to comply with reporting requirements, even in seemingly minor incidents. The best approach involves prioritizing safety and fulfilling legal duties promptly. This means ensuring the scene is safe, checking for injuries, exchanging information with the other driver, and only then moving vehicles if safe and necessary to do so. This aligns with the Highway Traffic Act's requirements for drivers involved in collisions, which emphasize the duty to remain at the scene, render assistance, and exchange particulars. It also reflects the ethical imperative to act with due care and consideration for others involved and for public safety. An incorrect approach would be to immediately leave the scene without exchanging information. This directly violates the Highway Traffic Act, which mandates that drivers involved in a collision must remain at the scene and provide their name, address, and driver's license number to any person sustaining loss or injury, or to a witness. Another incorrect approach would be to admit fault at the scene without a full understanding of the circumstances, as this could have insurance and legal repercussions. Furthermore, failing to check for injuries before considering vehicle movement could lead to exacerbating an injury or delaying necessary medical attention, which is a significant ethical and safety failure. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process in such situations. This involves 1. Immediate safety assessment. Is the scene safe? Are there injuries? 2. Legal compliance. What are the immediate legal obligations under the Highway Traffic Act? 3. Information exchange. Obtain and provide required information. 4. Damage assessment and vehicle movement, only if safe and necessary and after fulfilling other obligations. 5. Reporting. Determine if further reporting to authorities is required based on the severity of the incident. Question 15. Process analysis reveals that a driver in Ontario encounters a sudden, unexpected obstacle appearing in their lane of travel. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant immediate response to mitigate the risk of a collision? Option A. Immediately swerve sharply to the side without checking for other vehicles or pedestrians in adjacent lanes. Option B. Remain stationary and hope the obstacle moves out of the way. Option C. Accelerate rapidly to attempt to pass the obstacle before it becomes a direct threat. Option D. Assess the surrounding traffic, check mirrors and blind spots, signal if necessary, and execute a controlled braking or steering maneuver to avoid the obstacle while maintaining vehicle control. The correct answer is D. Assess the surrounding traffic, check mirrors and blind spots, signal if necessary, and execute a controlled braking or steering maneuver to avoid the obstacle while maintaining vehicle control. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver applicant in Ontario by requiring them to demonstrate an understanding of how to react to unexpected hazards while operating a vehicle. The challenge lies in assessing their ability to prioritize safety, follow established procedures, and make sound judgments under pressure, all of which are critical for safe driving and compliance with Ontario's Highway Traffic Act. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between appropriate defensive driving techniques and potentially dangerous or illegal maneuvers. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately assessing the situation, prioritizing the safety of all road users, and executing a controlled, legal maneuver to avoid the hazard. This includes checking mirrors and blind spots, signaling if necessary, and braking or steering in a controlled manner to create a safe distance or path. This approach aligns with the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's emphasis on defensive driving, which mandates drivers to anticipate and react to potential dangers, thereby minimizing the risk of collisions and ensuring compliance with traffic laws designed to protect public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves abruptly swerving without checking mirrors or blind spots. This action is a direct violation of safe driving practices and the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, as it can lead to collisions with other vehicles or pedestrians, creating a greater hazard than the initial one. It demonstrates a lack of situational awareness and disregard for the safety of others. Another incorrect approach is to accelerate rapidly to try and beat the hazard. This is a dangerous and unpredictable maneuver that could escalate the situation, potentially leading to a loss of control or a collision. It shows a failure to assess the risks involved and a disregard for the principles of safe stopping distances and controlled reactions. A third incorrect approach is to freeze and do nothing. This passive reaction is extremely dangerous as it allows the hazard to develop into a collision. It indicates a complete failure to engage in defensive driving and a lack of preparedness for common road scenarios, which is contrary to the expectations for licensed drivers in Ontario. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process when faced with unexpected road hazards. This involves 1. Immediate hazard identification, recognizing the presence and nature of the threat. 2. Risk assessment, evaluating the potential consequences of the hazard and various reaction options. 3. Prioritization of safety, always placing the safety of oneself and others above all else. 4. Legal and procedural compliance, ensuring any action taken adheres to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and established safe driving practices. 5. Controlled execution, implementing the chosen maneuver smoothly and deliberately. Question 16. System analysis indicates a driver's license applicant in Ontario has indicated a medical condition that may affect their ability to drive safely. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant method for the Ministry of Transportation to obtain the necessary medical information to assess the applicant's fitness to drive? Option A. Ask the applicant to provide a written self-declaration of their medical fitness to drive, without requiring physician verification. Option B. Instruct the applicant's physician to release their complete medical file to the Ministry without prior applicant consent. Option C. Obtain the applicant's explicit, informed consent to request a medical report directly from their treating physician. Option D. Access the applicant's medical records through an internal ministry database that aggregates health information from various sources. Correct answer is C. Obtain the applicant's explicit, informed consent to request a medical report directly from their treating physician. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect personal information. A driver's license applicant's medical information is sensitive and protected under Ontario's privacy legislation. Improper handling could lead to significant legal penalties and damage to the Ministry of Transportation's reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance while facilitating the licensing process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining the applicant's explicit, informed consent to access their medical information directly from their physician. This approach respects the applicant's privacy, rights as enshrined in Ontario's Personal Health Information Protection Act, FIPA. FIPA mandates that personal health information can only be collected, used, or disclosed with consent, unless specific exceptions apply. By seeking consent, the Ministry of Transportation acts in accordance with the law, ensuring that the applicant understands what information is being requested, why it is needed, and who will have access to it. This process also empowers the applicant to control their own health data. Incorrect approach is analysis. Requesting the applicant's physician to disclose their medical information without the applicant's explicit consent is a direct violation of FIPA. This constitutes an unauthorized disclosure of personal health information and could result in severe penalties for both the physician and the ministry. Asking the applicant to provide a self-assessment of their medical fitness without any supporting documentation from a healthcare professional bypasses the established regulatory requirements for assessing medical fitness to drive. This approach fails to ensure the safety of the applicant and the public, as it relies on potentially incomplete or inaccurate self-reporting, and does not meet the standards set by the Ontario Highway Traffic Act for medical evaluations. Directly accessing the applicant's medical records through an internal ministry system without a legal basis or consent is an egregious breach of privacy laws, including FIPA. Such an action would be considered unauthorized access and could lead to serious legal repercussions and disciplinary action. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the relevant legislation, e.g., FIPA, Highway Traffic Act. 2. Understanding the nature of the information being requested, sensitive personal health information. 3. Determining the legal requirements for accessing such information. Consent is paramount. 4. Implementing a process that obtains informed consent from the applicant. 5. Ensuring that any information collected is used solely for the authorized purpose and is protected from unauthorized access or disclosure. If there is any ambiguity, seeking legal counsel or consulting with privacy officers is crucial. Question 17. Governance review demonstrates that an applicant for an Ontario driver's license has provided information that appears to contradict details previously submitted. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the licensing officer? Option A. Directly and politely inform the applicant of the observed discrepancy and request clarification or correction of the information. Option B. Attempt to independently verify the applicant's personal details through unofficial channels. Option C. Immediately reject the driver's license application due to suspected misrepresentation. Option D. Proceed with processing the application while making a note of the discrepancy for potential future review. Correct answer is A. Directly and politely inform the applicant of the observed discrepancy and request clarification or correction of the information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect personal privacy and ensure data accuracy. A driver's license applicant has provided information that appears inconsistent, raising concerns about potential misrepresentation or errors. The challenge lies in how to address this discrepancy without violating privacy rights or prematurely accusing the applicant of wrongdoing, all while adhering to the specific requirements of the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, MTO, for driver's license applications. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a structured, transparent, and compliant approach. This means directly addressing the applicant about the observed discrepancy in a non-accusatory manner, explaining that verification is a standard part of the licensing process. The applicant should be given a clear opportunity to clarify or correct the information. This approach aligns with the principles of fairness and due process, ensuring the applicant is aware of the issue and has a chance to resolve it. It also upholds the MTO's mandate to ensure accurate and valid information is used for licensing, as outlined in the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and associated MTO policies regarding application integrity. This method respects the applicant's rights while fulfilling the regulatory requirement for accurate record keeping. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately rejecting the application based on the initial suspicion of inconsistency. This fails to provide the applicant with an opportunity to explain or correct potential errors, which is a fundamental aspect of procedural fairness. It also bypasses the established MTO procedures for handling discrepancies, which typically involve further inquiry before a final decision is made. Such an action could lead to an unfair denial of a license and potential challenges to the MTO's decision-making process. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the application without addressing the inconsistency, hoping it will not be discovered later. This is professionally negligent and ethically unsound. It undermines the integrity of the licensing system and the accuracy of MTO records. If the discrepancy is later identified, it could lead to the revocation of a license, legal repercussions for the applicant, and a breach of the MTO's duty to maintain accurate driver information as mandated by provincial legislation. A third incorrect approach is to seek external verification of the applicant's personal information from sources not explicitly authorized by MTO policy or provincial privacy legislation, without the applicant's consent or a clear legal basis. This would constitute a serious breach of privacy and could violate the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, PIPEDA, or equivalent provincial privacy laws, leading to significant legal and reputational damage. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a decision-making framework that prioritizes compliance, fairness, and accuracy. This involves 1. Identifying the discrepancy and its potential implications for the application's validity. 2. consulting relevant MTO policies and the Ontario Highway Traffic Act to understand the prescribed procedures for handling such issues. 3. Engaging the applicant directly and transparently to seek clarification, providing them with an opportunity to rectify any errors. 4. Documenting all interactions and decisions made throughout the process. 5. Escalating the matter to a supervisor or designated authority if the discrepancy cannot be resolved through direct communication, or if further investigation is warranted, ensuring adherence to all privacy and data protection regulations. Question 18. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of how to handle sensitive information requests. In Ontario, if a police officer from another province requests information about a specific driver's address for a non-criminal matter, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Ontario's privacy and traffic laws? Option A. Refuse to provide any information, citing provincial privacy regulations as an absolute barrier to interprovincial law enforcement requests. Option B. Verify the officer's identity and the legal authority for the request, consulting MTO policy and relevant Ontario legislation before disclosing any information. Option C. Disclose the information based on the officer's stated reason for needing it, assuming their purpose is valid. Option D. Provide the driver's address immediately, as police officers are generally presumed to have legitimate reasons for their requests. The correct answer is B. Verify the officer's identity and the legal authority for the request, consulting MTO policy and relevant Ontario legislation before disclosing any information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect personal information. The Ministry of Transportation Ontario, MTO, has specific regulations regarding the disclosure of driver information, and failing to adhere to these can result in significant penalties, including fines and reputational damage. The challenge lies in discerning legitimate requests from those that could lead to privacy breaches or misuse of sensitive data. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and its associated regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves verifying the legitimacy and legal basis of any request for driver information. This means confirming the identity of the requester, understanding the specific legal authority under which they are requesting the information, e.g., a court order, a valid law enforcement investigation, or a specific statutory provision allowing disclosure, and ensuring the request aligns with the principles of the Ontario Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. This approach upholds privacy rights while facilitating necessary information sharing within legal boundaries. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately providing the requested information without any verification. This directly violates privacy laws and MTO guidelines, as it presumes the requester has a right to the information without due diligence. This could lead to unauthorized access and misuse of personal data, creating liability for the individual or organization handling the information. Another incorrect approach is to refuse all requests outright, regardless of their apparent legitimacy or legal backing. While caution is necessary, an absolute refusal can impede legitimate investigations or legal processes, potentially leading to noncompliance with statutory obligations to cooperate with lawful requests. This approach lacks the nuanced judgment required for effective information management. A third incorrect approach is to provide the information based solely on the requester's stated purpose without independently verifying their authority or the legal justification. This relies on trust rather than established procedures and legal frameworks, opening the door to potential privacy breaches if the requester misrepresents their intentions or authority. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process when faced with requests for personal information. This process should include 1. Identifying the nature of the request and the information sought. 2. Consulting relevant legislation and MTO policies to determine the legal basis for disclosure. 3. Verifying the identity and authority of the requester. 4. Documenting the request, the decision, and the disclosure, if any. 5. Seeking legal counsel if there is any ambiguity regarding disclosure obligations. This systematic approach ensures compliance, protects privacy, and maintains professional integrity. Question 19. The assessment process reveals that a newly licensed Ontario G2 driver is eager to gain experience on provincial highways. What is the most appropriate guidance to provide regarding highway driving under their current license? Option A. Inform the driver they can drive on highways freely as they have passed their G2 road test. Option B. Explain that highway driving is permitted for G2 license holders, but with specific passenger limitations and a zero blood alcohol requirement, and advise them to familiarize themselves with these rules. Option C. Advise the driver that highway driving is not permitted until they obtain their full G license. Option D. Recommend that the driver only drive on highways with a parent or guardian present, regardless of the guardian's licensing status. The correct answer is B. Explain that highway driving is permitted for G2 license holders, but with specific passenger limitations and a zero blood alcohol requirement, and advise them to familiarize themselves with these rules. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario where a new driver, having recently passed their Ontario G2 road test, is eager to practice driving on highways. The situation is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the driver's enthusiasm with the strict requirements of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act regarding graduated licensing. The G2 license holder has demonstrated basic driving competence, but is not yet fully licensed for all road conditions, particularly high-speed environments. Careful judgment is required to ensure the driver adheres to legal restrictions and safety protocols. The best professional approach involves clearly explaining to the driver the specific restrictions of their G2 license in Ontario, particularly concerning highway driving. This includes emphasizing that G2 drivers are permitted to drive on highways, but with crucial limitations such as a maximum of 4 passengers under 25 years old, unless accompanied by a supervising driver with a valid G license, who has at least 4 years of driving experience and is under 65 years old, and a mandatory zero blood alcohol content. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, specifically Regulation 575/05, which outlines the conditions for G2 license holders. It prioritizes legal compliance and safety by providing accurate, actionable information tailored to the driver's current licensing stage. An incorrect approach would be to simply tell the driver they can drive on highways without mentioning any specific restrictions. This fails to uphold the legal obligations of the licensing framework and could lead to the driver inadvertently violating the law, potentially resulting in penalties and compromising safety. Another incorrect approach would be to advise the driver that highway driving is not permitted for G2 license holders. This is factually inaccurate according to Ontario's graduated licensing system and would unnecessarily restrict the driver's legal practice opportunities. Finally, suggesting that the driver should only drive on highways with a parent or guardian, regardless of their age or driving experience, is also incorrect as it does not reflect the specific passenger restrictions outlined in the Highway Traffic Act for G2 drivers. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes accurate information dissemination, legal compliance, and safety. This involves understanding the nuances of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and its regulations pertaining to graduated licensing. When advising a driver, the process should be: 1. Identify the driver's current license status. 2. Consult the relevant sections of the Highway Traffic Act and its regulations to determine permitted activities and restrictions. 3. Clearly communicate these findings to the driver in an understandable manner, emphasizing both permissions and limitations. 4. Reinforce the importance of adhering to these rules for their safety and legal standing. Question 20. Operational review demonstrates that a vehicle used for driver training in Ontario consumed 45 liters of gasoline to travel 550 kilometers. What is the vehicle's average fuel consumption in liters per 100 kilometers, rounded to 1 decimal place? Option A, 12.2 km/L. Option B, $0.08 per kilometer assuming fuel costs $1.60 per liter. Option C, 8.2 L/100 km. Option D, 45 liters. The correct answer is C, 8.2 L/100 km. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the accurate calculation of fuel consumption for a vehicle, directly impacting the driver's understanding of operational costs and potentially their ability to meet licensing requirements related to vehicle operation. The challenge lies in ensuring the calculation is precise, uses appropriate data, and adheres to the principles of fuel efficiency measurement as understood in the context of driver education in Ontario. Miscalculation could lead to a flawed understanding of vehicle performance and an inability to answer practical questions on the Ontario driver's test. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves calculating the average fuel consumption in liters per 100 kilometers, L/100 km, which is the standard metric used in Canada, including Ontario, for reporting fuel efficiency. This is achieved by dividing the total fuel consumed in liters by the total distance traveled in kilometers, and then multiplying by 100. This method provides a direct and universally understood measure of how much fuel a vehicle uses to cover a specific distance. The formula is \text fuel consumption L/100 km equals \frac\text total fuel L \text total distance km times 100 \. This aligns with the practical knowledge expected of drivers in Ontario, who will encounter this metric on vehicle labels and in discussions about fuel economy. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to calculate fuel consumption in kilometers per liter, km/L. While this metric also measures fuel efficiency, it is not the standard used in Ontario for reporting and is less intuitive for comparing different vehicles or understanding the cost implications of fuel usage over longer distances. Calculation would be \text fuel efficiency km/L equals \frac\text total distance km \text total fuel L \. This approach fails to meet the expected standard of knowledge for an Ontario driver. Another incorrect approach would be to simply state the total liters of fuel used without considering the distance traveled. This provides no information about the vehicle's efficiency and is therefore irrelevant to assessing fuel consumption. A further incorrect approach would be to calculate the cost of fuel per kilometer without first determining the liters per 100 kilometers. While cost is a related factor, the primary measure of fuel consumption efficiency is volume of fuel per distance, not monetary cost per distance, as the price of fuel fluctuates. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize using the standard and most relevant metrics for the jurisdiction. In Ontario, this means adhering to the L/100 km standard for fuel consumption. When faced with a calculation task, the first step is to identify the required output and the standard units of measurement for that jurisdiction. Then, gather the necessary data, total fuel and total distance, and apply the correct formula. If unsure about the standard metric, consulting official driver education materials or regulatory guidelines for Ontario is crucial. The goal is to provide accurate, understandable, and contextually relevant information.